And welcome to Unit 10, Module 55. We're talking about Freud's psychoanalytic theory today. Here are your learning objectives, and here is your vocab. Personality in general is an individual's enduring, and that's an important word, enduring characteristic, pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. So we're going to focus on what makes us unique in the way that we think, feel, and act. So we've already kind of talked around personality in a bunch of different ways, because personality is not just one thing. It's your biology, it's your development process, it's your the way you learn or what you have learned, what you're motivated by, your cultural, social influences, all of these things. So Freud started out as a neurologist. That's how he was trained. So more of like a medical doctor. And part of the reason is that there were only 2 psychology programs at his time when he was in school. So it really wasn't an option. He was treating women mostly with what was called neuroses at the time. And he noticed that there would be issues like maybe like their hand was like feeling numb or something. And he would kind of hypothesize that this might be actually related to something sexual that's being repressed. Remember that he was living during the Victorian age, and the Victorian age was a very prude, very sexually repressed. Remember, he focuses on the unconscious and uncovering that. And Freud said that our unconscious has these unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or wishes, and those like affect how we act in the real world. Now, how you work with Freud is called psychoanalysis. That's his perspective on the mind. So he said the thoughts and actions of the unconscious give us conflict, and that kind of arises in these different ways, and we act out or we feel these certain things. We don't understand them. How he would figure this out is through the use of free association. So he would have his patient say whatever comes to mind. It could be random, it could seem awkward or embarrassing. You just have to say it. Quick, don't think, just let it out. And he could try to follow this unconscious train of thought to get to what he believed was the source. And he believed that the source of their problems was in childhood. There were painful memories in childhood that are affecting them today. And then if they can be uncovered, the person can be relieved of these uncomfortable feelings or behaviors. So any sort of joke, dream, or slip of the tongue, those were all like ways to discover the unconscious. And we've talked about this before, but in dreams, there was the manifest content. And this is like what actually happens in the dream, like the purple monster chasing you. And then there's the latent content. And the latent content is that unconscious, like the true meaning of the dream. Let's talk about Freud's view of personality. So there are 3 parts to his view of personality: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id works on the pleasure principle. This means that it wants what it wants, and it wants it now. And Freud said that most of what it wants is like some sort of sexual or aggressive type thing. If you look at the iceberg, the id is completely unconscious. It's underneath the surface completely, and so we're not aware of the id. Then there is the ego, and that should be bolded and underlined because that's a vocab. And this is kind of the executor, and it goes between the superego and the id, and it operates on the reality principle. So this is trying to satisfy the id's demand for immediate gratification, and also the superego's like high moral standard. So if you look at if you look at the ego, most of the ego is above water. Most of it is in the conscious mind. But obviously it works with the id, so it's not completely. And then there's the superego. The superego is kind of like, if you think of the id as like the devil on one side whispering, you know, like those cartoons where the devil's like whispering one thing to the person. And then over here would be the superego, which is kind of that angel telling you like the always the right thing to do. So it operates on the ideal. It's taking internalized ideals from society that they've taken in and using those for judgment and always pushing the person to do the just right thing. So if you look at the superego, it's more in our preconscious, which means like it's accessible, we can think about it, but it's not completely conscious all the time. So he also had developmental stages. And some of the people we've talked about in development kind of use these as a guideline, but obviously very different. Piaget, for one. So these are the psychosexual stages, and they are oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. Yes, they are sexual. So during which this is all about the id's pleasure-seeking erogenous zones. So each one of those, except for latent. So the first one, oral, this happens between 0 to 18 months. So remember how Piaget said sensory motor, they're putting everything in their mouth. So oral is about kids putting everything in their mouth, right? That's how they're eating. They're spending a lot of time feeding by sucking or sucking on toys, literally anything they can get in their mouth. They're biting, they're chewing. It's all about the mouth. That's 0 to 18 months. Then they go through the anal phase, which is 18 to 36 months. And just for reference, that's 1.5 to 3 years. So they're focusing on potty training at this time, right? So they're learning to control. Pleasure focuses on the bowel and the bladder. So learning to go to the bathroom. If you've ever heard the phrase like someone's so anal about something, like, oh, they're so anal about that, right? That comes from this Freudian stage, the idea of control, like putting things in control, putting things into order. Phallic is the next stage, and that's 3 to 6 years old. And this is about the genitals. And this is also where the Oedipus complex happens. And the Oedipus complex is Freud's theory that boys' sexual desire towards his mother. During this time, they sexually desire their mom, and they have feelings of jealousy and hatred toward their father. There's something also later called the Electra complex, which is girls having sexual desires for their fathers and feeling jealousy toward their mother. So 3 to 6 is phallic, and then latency is 6 years old to puberty. And he said latent, meaning like there's actually no sexual feelings at this point. And then from puberty on, it's the genital phase. And this is when puberty occurs. So it's sexual interest, sexual drive kicks into gear. So at any point in these stages, someone can get fixated. And so if they get fixated in the oral stage, when they are adults, they might need to constantly smoke cigars, Freud, or cigarettes or whatever, or they might need to chew gum, or they're eating a lot, right? That would be a problem where they're fixated in the oral stage. Fixated in the anal stage might be something like needing to be in control of things, needing order and control in all things. He also believed that with the unconscious, these memories were pushed down for a reason. They're uncomfortable thoughts that we don't want to have. And so we create defense mechanisms to protect our ego from realizing these awful realities. Like the Oedipus complex is so awful, we would push that down. We would have a defense mechanism for it. And so under the umbrella of all types of defense mechanisms is something called repression. So repression is just the idea that we push down out of conscious awareness these terrible thoughts. So these are the defense mechanisms, so ways of repressing that you need to know. I'm not going to go over each of them now. We are going to spend a lot of time in class, but just look through them, make sure you take note of them, and the examples can look at what modern research says about all of this very interesting Freudian stuff. So remember, he was one of the first in his field. So it's really hard to compare. It's like comparing what Henry Ford did for cars to all of the cars now. Like, it's not really fair to compare because he didn't have all the research, all the technology that we have today to know what we know about genes, about the environment, and all of that. But they do have some critiques of his ideas now, and some of them are not accepted now. For example, developmental psychologists say development's lifelong. He definitely overestimated, according to researchers, parental influence, and he underestimated peers. He was critiqued, obviously, for the Oedipus complex. That is not accepted today. And also his gender identity process, where he believed that through those developmental stages, we would look to our parents and mimic them to become masculine or feminine. But that doesn't even work because you could not have a father figure and still become masculine. So that doesn't really work either. In his work with the women in the Victorian age, he did hear many stories of childhood sexual abuse, and he actually was skeptical that these actually happened, and he viewed them as these unconscious, repressed desires. And so he kind of morphs everything into it must be some unconscious thing, and it must come from childhood. And when he says that or does that, there's no way to prove him wrong, right? He's saying, you feel this way because of that thing that happened in your childhood. Well, there's no way to prove that or prove it wrong. So there's a lot of hindsight bias, and that's also a big critique with his theory. Repression is a word that's used a lot, but the important thing to remember from all of this info here is that repression of traumatic events is not really accepted by researchers. Researchers do not find evidence for people repressing very traumatic events. You need to only look to the Holocaust or September 11th or something that was very traumatic for someone to know that people have flashbulb memories of those really intense moments. Our brain is kind of wired to remember those. Your takeaways. Personality is something that's enduring. It's your thoughts, your feelings, and our unconscious via free association is a way to understanding or through dreams. The personality is id, ego, and superego. Manifest is the actual dream, the purple monster, and latent is the hidden meaning. Remember the psychosexual stages, and a little mnemonic for remembering oral, anal, phallic, latent, genital is on a plane, let's go. Know the defense mechanisms, and there's not much evidence to support the idea that we repress trauma. So that sums up Module 55, and